Hello, you're listening to Lists and Other Things That No One Asked For with Jesse Barbin, your weekly mini podcast where stuff usually takes the form of a list about pop culture, music, growing up. So I hope you like it. I've always wanted to be a sports guy, like a guy who knows a lot about sports, Those guys always seemed cool to me growing up, and because people always wanted to talk about sports, it seemed like a common shared language that I just never understood because I didn't know the first thing about sports. I feel like some kids learn about sports from their dad, but my dad never really saw a lot of value in sports as far as I could tell. We never had them on TV, and he never talked about them. This is fine, of course. It was just different from other dads. I think my dad was just in the thick of trying to keep our family afloat, for one, so he didn't have too much time for sports. And for another thing, I don't think his dad was into sports. And lastly, I think he was more of a car guy, so if he had free time or money, it would logically go towards car stuff. Another reason I never got into sports is because I never played them either. Primarily because whenever I asked to get into soccer or basketball, my dad would tell me we couldn't afford it, which I resented at the time, but I understand now. I did always want to know what was going on in sports, though. People would talk to me about yardage and conferences and playoffs and other things, and I could just never grasp it. I wanted to understand what sports were about, but not enough to actually put in the effort to learn the rules. Does that make sense? To be clear, I'm not actually that interested in sports. I just wanted to be able to talk to other people about them. If you don't know about sports and you're around a bunch of other guys, it can be rough. Who's your team? Did you see the game last night? Any of that type of talk strikes fear into my heart. Early on, I got really into music, and pretty heavily, and it kind of filled the void. I got vaguely knowledgeable about some different forms of music, and I felt for a time like I could talk to most people about music. Nowadays, I can't because there are so many different types of music and you can listen to literally anything on the internet, so I'm not very knowledgeable about anything new. Still, I couldn't talk about sports. The most seen I've ever felt was the episode Are We Not Men of the IT Crowd. It's probably one of my favorite episodes of TV ever. IT nerds Moss and Roy, who know nothing about sports, try to be proper men by watching sports and hanging out with hypermasculine dudes. They get a phone app and it lets them know what to say when they're talking about soccer, and they infiltrate a group of bros and quickly get in over their heads. Roy was relishing being accepted by the proper men, but Moss knows it's too good to be true. And the best quote from the episode is when Moss tells Roy, "We're messing with stuff we don't understand. We're through the looking glass." And of course, it all goes wrong. It's funny because later in life I've sort of gotten into sports, or at least a little bit. Let's say I've dipped a toe in the water of sports. I'm not sure when I got into sports, and I say got into loosely because, as I mentioned, I'm just a casual fan. I think it was during the pandemic. Things were locked down, there was nothing to do, and then it was announced that the NHL would be restarting and that they would live in a bubble and they would be COVID tested constantly, and this was very fascinating to me. I had always been interested in Canada, and I wanted to pick a sport that wasn't super common like football or basketball. Picking hockey felt like I could have a little of both. Stay aloof from sports, but also have something to follow. Honestly, I don't have the patience to sit down and watch a full game, but I do like keeping track of the different teams and how they're winning and how they're doing. Now is the golden age of being a sports poser or casual sports consumer. I can see a 3-hour hockey game condensed into a 13-minute highlight video, or even go to a website that clips out the fights, which is everyone's favorite part. In my phone and Google, I can pin the scores of the teams I like, so anytime one of these teams is playing, it just pops up and I can see the score in real time. It can also pin the local sports teams, like the Indiana Fever, so I can at least have a clue of what people are talking about on them. It's a relief to be able to talk to people at the water cooler at work and be like, oh yeah, they're not doing so good, or they're doing so good, etc., etc. There's also Locked On Sports, which makes podcasts about literally any professional team you want to know about. It's a pretty brief daily podcast, and it'll give you enough info to be able to talk casually with other people. I don't know the names of many specific athletes, but I enjoy tracking who's winning and losing. I guess I'm surprised at how much I like this stuff. I like reading statistics and following the few teams I'm interested in and seeing who wins. I also like making brackets and seeing the brackets get busted. A few years ago, I went and saw a professional sports team for the first time as an adult. I went and saw the Indy Fuel, and it was one of the more fun things I've done. You can chant, and you can get a hot dog, and when the team wins and you're there, it feels amazing. And when you lose and you're there, you take it extra hard. If I could, I would go see the Indy Fuel play all the time. I don't know what it is, and I feel weird about it, but I love it. I guess at the end of the day, it's okay to try new things, and some things that are very mainstream can also be cool and fun, even though you previously resisted them on principle because you think you're too smart. if you're playing along at home, next week's list will be the top 10 albums I heard about from my mother. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. If you prefer reading, there's a Substack. You can talk to me on any social medias at Jesse Barbin. Have a good week.